Picture this, if you will. It's 1866, and you're standing on the Texas plains under a sun so merciless it could melt the hope right out of a man's heart. The horizon stretches endlessly in every direction, broken only by the skeletal remains of broken wagon wheels and sun-bleached bones scattered across the landscape like some macabre calling cards left by failed dreams. This is where we find Charles Goodnight on a particularly brutal day in late summer, standing among what can only be described as a graveyard of ambition. Twisted axles jut from the earth at odd angles, canvas covers hang in tatters from busted wagon frames, flapping in the hot wind like surrender flags, and scattered everywhere, absolutely everywhere, are the remains of provisions that were supposed to keep frontier communities alive. Spoiled flour caked into concrete-hard chunks, mouldy bacon crawling with maggots, broken barrels leaking precious molasses into the thirsty ground. Goodnight kicks at a tight, burst sack of beans, watching the contents spill across the hard-pan earth, and he's doing mathematics in his head. The cruel mathematics of frontier survival. 40%. That's the number that haunts every supply run into this god-forsaken territory. 40% of everything loaded onto wagons in the relative civilization of eastern Texas will be ruined, broken, spoiled, or lost before it reaches the desperate settlements scattered across this wilderness. 40% failure rate on supplies that mean the difference between life and death for families trying to carve out existence from this unforgiving land. Now think about what that means for a moment. In settlement after settlement across the frontier, mothers are stretching meager flour rations, making bread so thin you could read a newspaper through it. Children are growing gaunt while their parents argue over whether to use the last precious cup of sugar for preserving fruit or making medicine. Once friendly neighbors are coming to blows over the final sack of beans in town because nobody knows when the next supply wagon might make it through intact. And it's not just personal tragedy we're talking about here. The economic hemorrhaging runs so deep it's threatening to strangle the entire westward expansion in its cradle. Freight companies are folding monthly, their owners bankrupted by the impossible logistics of keeping goods intact across 2,000 miles of hell. Eastern suppliers, sensing desperation, are jacking up prices to monopolistic levels, knowing that desperate people will pay anything for necessities. Goodnight. Weathered by years as a Texas Ranger and haunted by watching too many communities crumble into ghost towns, understands something that most folks haven't grasped yet. Conquering this land requires more than just courage, more than determination, more than the pioneering spirit. It demands nothing less than revolutionizing how supplies move across this vast emptiness. He's seen the statistics painted in human misery. He's watched strong men weep over ruined loads that represented months of planning and investment. He's held dying children whose parents couldn't afford the inflated prices charged by Eastern monopolists. And he knows, with the clarity that only comes from witnessing systematic failure, that someone needs to solve this problem, or the American West will remain forever a beautiful, deadly, empty promise. The traditional supply wagons are engineering disasters waiting to happen. Weak axles that snap at the first rough patch, poor weight distribution that leads to catastrophic load shifts, no consideration for the brutal temperature swings that can freeze supplies solid one night and cook them to ruin the next day, and worst of all, no understanding of how to preserve food across the weeks or months required for long-distance hauling. As Goodnight surveys this latest disaster, calculating the human cost of another failed supply run, he hears the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Jake Thornton, a rival wagon master with a reputation as brutal as the territory itself, rides up with a sneer already spreading across his weather-beaten face. Well, good night, Thornton calls out, spitting tobacco juice that sizzles when it hits the hot ground. Looks like you've got yourself another supply wagon disaster. How many does that make this summer? 6? 7? Goodnight doesn't respond immediately. He's learned that showing emotion to men like Thornton is like showing weakness to a pack of wolves. You know what your problem is, Goodnight? Thornton continues, clearly enjoying himself. You keep trying to fight this land instead of accepting it. The desert takes what it wants. The heat spoils what it chooses. The rough country breaks what it will. That's just the way of things out here. Now Thornton's voice takes on a mocking tone that cuts deeper than the criticism itself. Even the devil himself couldn't keep supplies fresh in this hellscape. Maybe it's time you accepted that some problems just can't be solved. And there it is, the challenge that will echo in Goodnight's mind for months to come. The casual dismissal of human ingenuity in the face of natural obstacles. The assumption that failure is inevitable, that the frontier will always be a place where good intentions go to die alongside the dreamers who carried them. But Charles Goodnight is not most men. He's survived Comanche raids that left experienced rangers dead or worse. He's navigated political chaos that would have broken lesser spirits. He's seen enough of what humans can accomplish when necessity meets determination to know that Thornton's cynicism, while understandable, is wrong. Standing there in the wreckage of another failed supply run, surrounded by the evidence of systematic breakdown, with Thornton's mocking laughter still ringing in his ears, Charles Goodnight makes a vow that will transform not just his own fortunes, but the entire character of the American West. He's going to solve this problem, not partially, not temporarily, but completely and permanently. He's going to design a supply system so efficient, so durable, so perfectly adapted to frontier conditions that the 40% failure rate becomes a relic of the past. He's going to prove that even the devil himself would be impressed by what human ingenuity can accomplish when it's properly applied. The question is, how exactly does a man go about revolutionizing an entire industry when everyone else has already given up trying? The revelation comes to Charles Goodnight during one of those sleepless nights that the frontier seems to specialize in producing. It's late in 1866, and he's lying on his bedroll under a canopy of stars so brilliant they seem close enough to pluck from the sky. But Goodnight isn't admiring the celestial display. His mind is churning, turning over the same problems that have been eating at him since that humiliating encounter with Jake Thornton. Then, like lightning illuminating a dark landscape, the memories start connecting in ways they never had before. Civil War ambulances he'd seen during his service. The way military supply trains organized their loads. The mobile field kitchens that somehow managed to feed hundreds of soldiers while constantly on the move. What if, he thinks, what if you could take the best ideas from military logistics and adapt them specifically for frontier conditions? By dawn, Goodnight has the skeleton of an idea. By the end of the week, he's made his way to Fort Worth and found himself standing in the sweltering workshop of Otto Schultz, a German blacksmith whose reputation for precision engineering has spread throughout North Texas. Now picture this workshop, if you will. It's a cathedral of practical innovation, filled with the constant ring of hammer on anvil and the hiss of red-hot iron meeting water. Schultz himself looks like he was forged from the same materials he works with. Massive shoulders, hands like iron vises, and eyes that can spot a structural weakness from across the room. Herr Goodnight, Schultz says in his thick German accent, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag that's seen better decades. You describe something that has never been built before. A wagon that must survive buffalo wallows that would break a normal axle like a matchstick. A kitchen that moves across the wilderness yet produces meals as reliable as any restaurant. You ask for the impossible, Ja? But Goodnight has learned that impossible is often just another word for untried. Together, they begin the methodical process of engineering solutions to each deadly problem that has been plaguing frontier supply runs. The axles come first. Standard wagon axles are designed for farm work, for relatively smooth roads, for loads that stay balanced and don't shift dramatically. But the frontier demands something entirely different. Schultz forges axles from reinforced iron, thicker and stronger than anything currently in use, designed to flex rather than snap when a wheel drops into a buffalo wallow or hits a hidden rock. Then comes the revolutionary idea that will set Goodnight's design apart from every other wagon on the frontier, the hinged tailgate. Watch Schultz as he demonstrates the concept, dropping the tailgate and suddenly creating a flat work surface at exactly the right height for food preparation. It's brilliant in its simplicity, transforming the back of the wagon from a storage space into a fully functional outdoor kitchen. But the real genius emerges as they design what Goodnight starts calling the chuck box. This isn't just storage. This is organization taken to a level that would make a military quartermaster weep with joy. Every drawer, every compartment, every space is sized for specific supplies. The eat-in irons, plates, cups, and utensils fit perfectly in their designated slots. The sourdough keg sits in a specially carved niche that prevents it from shifting even during the roughest travel. And then there are the spices. Now this might seem like a minor detail, but Goodnight understands something that most frontier supply masters miss entirely. Morale is a matter of survival. Men who eat nothing but beans and hardtack for weeks on end become sullen, argumentative, prone to desertion or worse. But add some chili pepper to those beans, some sage to that tough beef, a pinch of precious cinnamon to the morning coffee, and suddenly you've got a crew that looks forward to mealtime instead of dreading it. Local cowboys start gathering around the workshop as word spreads about Goodnight's kitchen contraption. The mockery is immediate and merciless. Charlie's building himself a fancy dining room on wheels. They laugh. Maybe he'll add some lace curtains and a chandelier next. But Goodnight methodically ignores the ridicule and continues refining his design. He adds what he calls the possum belly, a rawhide sling stretched beneath the wagon for carrying dry kindling. You see, one of the biggest problems with frontier cooking is finding fuel for fires. Wood is scarce in much of the territory, and what you can find is often too green or too wet to burn properly. But with the possum belly constantly collecting dry branches and buffalo chips as the wagon moves, there's always fuel ready when needed. The water barrels get positioned with scientific precision, not just for easy access, but for cooling through evaporation. The constant movement of air around the barrels as the wagon travels helps keep the water temperature down, preventing the rapid spoilage that ruins so many supply runs. Then comes the toolbox, IM, what Goodnight starts calling the boot, positioned where it can be accessed without unpacking half the wagon. Broken axles, loose wheels, damaged harnesses. These aren't inconveniences on the frontier, they're potential death sentences. Having the right tools immediately available can mean the difference between a quick repair and being stranded in hostile territory. The first real test comes when Goodnight decides to hire a cook for his experimental wagon. This isn't just about finding someone who can boil beans without burning them. He needs someone who understands that frontier cooking is as much about psychology as nutrition. Someone who can work miracles with limited ingredients under impossible conditions. That's when he meets Bolivar, a freed slave whose culinary genius will become the stuff of legend. Bolivar takes one look at the chuck wagon design and immediately understands what Goodnight is trying to accomplish. "Mr. Goodnight," he says in a voice that carries the weight of hard-earned wisdom, "this here wagon could feed an army proper if a man knows what he's doing." Together, they begin the careful process of loading 2,000 pounds of supplies with military precision. Every item has its place. Every space serves multiple purposes. Flour and sugar in waterproof containers, coffee beans in triple-sealed tins, bacon wrapped and stored where temperature fluctuations will be minimal, salt and other preservatives positioned for maximum effectiveness. The betting starts almost immediately. Competing wagon masters, traditional freight haulers, even some of Goodnight's friends are placing wagers on how quickly this foolish innovation will collapse under real frontier conditions. The smart money says the wagon will break down within the first 100 miles. The really smart money says it won't even make it out of Texas. But as dawn breaks over the Trinity River on that first morning, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seem to promise either triumph or disaster, Goodnight's experimental wagon rolls toward its destiny. Every board has been carefully selected and positioned. Every bolt has been tested and retested. Every inch of space has been optimized for maximum efficiency. It's a calculated gamble against conventional wisdom, a bet that engineering and ingenuity can triumph over the brutal realities of frontier life. The question that hangs in the morning air like heat shimmer is simple enough to state but terrifying to contemplate. Will this revolutionary design prove that the impossible is just another word for untried? Or will Charles Goodnight join the long list of dreamers whose innovations became nothing more than expensive lessons in the unforgiving mathematics of frontier failure? The Goodnight-loving trail of 1867 becomes the ultimate proving ground for every theory, every innovation, every calculated gamble that Charles Goodnight and Otto Schultz hammered out in that sweltering Fort Worth workshop. Picture this, if you will. 2,000 head of cattle stretched across the horizon like a living river, flowing through territory so hostile that most maps simply marked it as unexplored or, more ominously, inadvisable. Charles Goodnight and his partner Oliver Loving are driving this massive herd toward Colorado, following a route that no wagon has ever survived intact. It's a journey that will take them through some of the most unforgiving landscape on the North American continent, past waterholes that have been poisoned by alkali, through territory controlled by Comanche war parties, across rivers that can go from dry creek beds to raging torrents in the space of an hour. And somewhere in the middle of this organized chaos, Goodnight's revolutionary chuck wagon rolls forward, untested and unproven, carrying the hopes and skepticism of every man on the drive. The first real challenge comes at Horsehead Crossing on the Pecos River, a place with a reputation so sinister that even hardened frontiersmen speak of it in whispers. The name itself comes from the countless skulls of horses that litter the banks, animals that died after drinking the alkali-poisoned water that has killed more men than Comanche bullets ever did. Traditional supply wagons have been foundering at this crossing for years. The approaches are treacherous, with quicksand that can swallow a fully loaded wagon in minutes. The water level fluctuates wildly, and the bottom is littered with the debris of previous crossing attempts. Most wagon masters lose entire loads here, watching helplessly as months of planning and investment disappear into the muddy current. But Goodnight's reinforced design plows through conditions that would have been catastrophic for conventional wagons. Those iron axles that Schultz forged to bend rather than break absorb punishment that would have shattered standard equipment. The careful weight distribution prevents the dangerous load shifts that have doomed so many other attempts. And then there's Bolivar, working miracles with his mobile kitchen that would have been impossible with traditional camp cooking arrangements. Watch him as the sun sets over the Pecos, transforming what should have been another meal of cold hardtack and questionable water into something approaching civilization. Hot sourdough biscuits emerge from Dutch ovens buried in carefully managed coals. Son of a gun stew, a frontier delicacy made from choice parts of a fresh-killed calf, fills the air with aromas that remind hardened cowboys of their mothers' kitchens. This isn't just about nutrition. Understand. This is about maintaining crew morale during a journey that breaks strong men's spirits as easily as it breaks wagon axles. When you're pushing cattle through territory where a single mistake can cost lives, when you're sleeping under stars with one ear always listening for the whisper of moccasins on grass, when you're dealing with the constant stress of knowing that the nearest help is hundreds of miles away, hot meals served from real plates become a psychological anchor to civilization. The wagon's organization proves revolutionary during the crisis situations that seem to erupt daily on the trail. When prairie fires rage across the landscape, turning the sky orange and filling the air with choking smoke, tools deploy from their designated storage spaces in seconds. Shovels and wet sacks appear instantly from the boot. Water buckets are passed down the line with military efficiency. What would have been minutes of frantic searching with traditional supply arrangements becomes a coordinated response that can save lives and livestock. When the spring floods hit and normally placid streams become torrential rivers, the elevated storage compartments in Goodnight's wagon keep precious supplies dry while other outfits watch their provisions wash away. Flour stays usable. Coffee remains uncontaminated. Medical supplies emerge ready for use instead of ruined by water damage. Speaking of medical supplies, the wagon's design shines during the inevitable injuries that plague long cattle drives. When a cowboy named Tom Henderson gets trampled during a stampede, his leg twisted into an unnatural angle and blood seeping through torn fabric, medical supplies appear from their designated compartments in the chuck box like magic. Bandages, laudanum for pain, splints, even surgical instruments, ESA. Everything organized and immediately accessible instead of buried somewhere in a jumbled mass of general supplies. The economic implications of what Goodnight has accomplished start becoming clear as the drive progresses. His ledgers, meticulously maintained throughout the journey, reveal numbers that seem almost impossible. Where the industry standard has been 40% supply loss, MSPA. That devastating statistic that has bankrupted so many frontier operations, Goodnight's innovative design is achieving only 10% loss. 10%. Let that sink in for a moment. Where traditional supply methods lose nearly half of everything to spoilage, breakage, and poor planning, Goodnight's system is preserving 90% of its cargo. The financial impact is staggering. The human impact is even greater. Word starts spreading along the frontier network with the speed that only truly revolutionary news achieves. Competing wagon masters are sending spies disguised as cowboys, trying to steal design secrets that could transform their own operations. Established freight companies are denouncing the wagon as a dangerous disruption to proven methods. The kind of language that established industries always use when someone threatens their monopolistic stranglehold. But the numbers don't lie, and the results speak louder than any corporate opposition. The chuck wagon enables longer drives to become profitable for the first time, opening vast territories that were previously deemed unreachable by economic necessity. Cattle drives that would have been impossible under traditional supply limitations suddenly become feasible ventures. By midsummer, when the herd reaches Colorado with the crew healthy and supplies intact, something unprecedented has happened. The ridiculous wagon method that drew mockery in Fort Worth has shattered every assumption about frontier logistics. Cowboys who started the drive skeptical about Goodnight's innovations are now converts, spreading word of the mobile miracle that made their survival possible. But perhaps the most telling moment comes when they encounter Jake Thornton's outfit struggling with yet another supply disaster along the trail. Thornton himself, the man who had mocked Goodnight's ambitions and declared that even the devil himself couldn't keep supplies fresh in this hellscape, stands silently watching as Bolivar serves hot meals to healthy, well-fed men from a wagon that shows every sign of thriving under conditions that have destroyed Thornton's traditional approach. The vindication is complete, but Goodnight takes no satisfaction in his rival's misfortune. He understands that the real victory isn't proving Thornton wrong. It's proving that human ingenuity can triumph over seemingly impossible natural obstacles when it's properly applied and thoroughly tested. The question now becomes, what happens when word of this revolution reaches the established powers who have built their fortunes on the inefficient status quo? The chuck wagon revolution transforms the American West with a speed that would make modern viral marketing campaigns seem sluggish by comparison. By 1870, just 3 years after Goodnight's successful proof of concept on the Goodnight-Loving Trail, over 500 chuck wagons are rolling across the plains, each one a traveling hearth around which an entirely new culture begins to crystallize. Think about what this means for a moment. You have manufacturers from St. Louis to San Antonio racing to build Goodnight's design, often improving on his original innovations. Iron foundries are retooling their operations to produce the reinforced axles that make long-distance hauling possible. Woodworkers are perfecting the hinged tailgate mechanism that transforms transportation into mobile kitchens. An entire industry springs up around what started as one man's solution to a seemingly impossible problem. But the real transformation isn't mechanical, it's human. Around these chuck wagons, during those evening gatherings when the day's work is done and the cattle are settled for the night, something unprecedented is happening in American society. Mexican vaqueros are sharing rope-working techniques with former Confederate soldiers. Freed slaves like Bolivar are becoming respected crew leaders whose opinions carry weight in life-or-death decisions. Teenage boys from farms back east are becoming men through the democracy of shared hardship and communal meals served from the back of a wagon. Picture one of these evening scenes, if you will. The sun is setting over the endless grassland, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no artist could capture. The cattle have been bedded down for the night, with night riders circling the herd to watch for trouble. And gathered around the chuck wagon, men from backgrounds so different they might as well be from different planets, are sharing stories, techniques, and dreams over plates of beans and sourdough biscuits. The economic impact reshapes power structures across the entire frontier. Efficient supply lines enable the great cattle drives that feed the growing cities of the East, shifting wealth from monopolistic suppliers to innovative ranchers who understand that success comes from adapting to conditions rather than fighting them. The 40% failure rate that once made frontier commerce a gamble becomes a relic of the past, replaced by reliable logistics that make long-term planning possible for the first time. Chuck wagon cooks achieve a status that approaches legend. Names like Wishbone Wilson and Dutch Oven Davis become frontier celebrities whose sourdough recipes and coffee-making secrets pass from crew to crew like precious family heirlooms. These men aren't just preparing food. They're creating the cultural glue that holds diverse crews together during months of isolation and danger. The influence of Goodnight's innovation extends far beyond cattle drives. Military observers, always alert to innovations that might provide tactical advantages, begin adapting the chuck wagon design for field kitchens. The organizational principles that Goodnight and Schultz hammered out in that Fort Worth workshop, everything in its place, every space serving multiple purposes, reliability over complexity. 2. Find their way into military supply doctrine that will influence everything from the Spanish-American War to the trenches of World War I. Modern rapid deployment forces, with their emphasis on mobile, self-contained units capable of operating independently in hostile territory, trace their conceptual lineage directly back to Goodnight's revolutionary wagon. The idea that you can carry civilization with you rather than depending on fixed supply lines becomes a cornerstone of military thinking that persists to this day. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the chuck wagon's legacy is how it reflects the character of the man who created it. Charles Goodnight himself, enriched by his innovation but haunted by the advance of civilization into the wild spaces he loves, turns his attention to conservation. He establishes the J.A. Ranch in the Texas Panhandle, creating a sanctuary where the frontier spirit can survive, even as the frontier itself disappears under the advance of railroads and telegraph lines. When the buffalo face extinction from commercial hunting, Goodnight becomes one of the few ranchers with the vision and resources to save them. His J.A. Ranch becomes a refuge where these magnificent animals can survive and multiply, ensuring that future generations will know something other than museum displays and old photographs. It's a fitting legacy for a man who understood that innovation should preserve what's valuable while improving what's necessary. In 1926, at 90 years old, Goodnight stands beside his original chuck wagon during what will be the final cattle drive commemoration in Texas. His eyes, still sharp despite his age, reflect both pride and loss as he watches automobiles pass the creaking wheels that once carried civilization across an untamed continent. The world has changed beyond recognition from the harsh frontier where his innovation was born, but the principles he pioneered, efficiency, reliability, adaptation to harsh conditions, AS, remain as relevant as ever. The irony isn't lost on observers that the man who helped tame the frontier through mechanical innovation now mourns the passing of the very wilderness his success helped to civilize. But that's the eternal paradox of progress. Every solution creates new problems. Every triumph carries the seeds of future challenges. Today, if you look carefully, you can trace the DNA of Goodnight's innovation through countless aspects of modern life. Food trucks rolling through Austin, serving gourmet meals from mobile kitchens, represent a direct evolution of the chuck wagon concept. Outdoor cooking enthusiasts, reverently practicing Dutch oven techniques learned from chuck wagon cooks, are preserving skills that once meant survival on the frontier. Management consultants study the chuck wagon as an early example of mobile workspace optimization, recognizing in Goodnight's design principles that remain relevant in an age of remote work and flexible office arrangements. The idea that workspace should adapt to need rather than forcing need to adapt to workspace has become a cornerstone of modern organizational thinking. Even NASA, as they plan missions to Mars and beyond, studies the chuck wagon model for lessons in creating self-contained, mobile units capable of sustaining human life in hostile environments. The organizational principles that kept cowboys fed and healthy during months on the frontier may well help keep astronauts alive during years in space. The ridiculous wagon method that revolutionized frontier logistics lives on wherever ingenuity meets necessity, wherever someone looks at an impossible problem and refuses to accept that impossibility is permanent. In corporate boardrooms and military planning sessions, in expedition planning and disaster relief operations, the spirit of Goodnight's innovation continues to inspire new solutions to age-old problems. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the chuck wagon isn't technological or organizational. It's cultural. The idea that meals shared around a mobile hearth can create community among strangers, that good food can maintain morale under the worst conditions, that treating people well is not just morally right but practically essential. These insights remain as relevant today as they were on the precious frontier. In an age when we often feel disconnected from our neighbors, when technology seems to isolate us as much as it connects us, when the pace of change can leave us feeling unmoored from tradition and community, the chuck wagon reminds us of something fundamental about human nature. We are social creatures who need gathering places, shared rituals, and common purpose to thrive. Charles Goodnight's wagon was never just about moving supplies efficiently across hostile territory. It was about creating a mobile center of civilization, a traveling home that could maintain human dignity and community, even in the harshest conditions imaginable. That vision, practical, innovative, but fundamentally humane, represents the best of the American frontier spirit, and that, ultimately, is proof that one person's practical solution, born of necessity and refined through determination, really can reshape a nation's destiny. The chuck wagon revolution didn't just change how supplies moved across the frontier, it changed how Americans thought about community, adaptation, and the relationship between innovation and human need. From the ashes of failure and the mockery of conventional wisdom, Charles Goodnight created something that outlasted the frontier, outlasted the cattle drives, outlasted even the man himself. He proved that even the devil himself would have to tip his hat to what human ingenuity can accomplish when it's properly applied to solving real problems for real people. That legacy rolls on, carried forward on wheels both literal and metaphorical, wherever someone refuses to accept that impossible is anything more than another word for untried.